Her name was Elena, and to those who knew her, she was the embodiment of grace and peace. If you walked past her small white house at the edge of town, you would smell the roses she cared for every morning, their fragrance drifting into the narrow street where children played. The curtains in her windows, always white and freshly washed, swayed gently with the wind as if the house itself breathed serenity. To the neighbors, Elena's life looked like something out of a storybook, calm, harmonious, and beautifully ordinary. Every day began with a ritual. Before the first streaks of dawn painted the horizon, Elena was already awake. She enjoyed those sacred moments when the world was still half asleep, when silence felt like a blanket over the town. She would slip her feet into her slippers, tie her hair loosely, and walk to the kitchen where the smell of coffee beans awaited. Grinding them was her first task, a sound so familiar that she compared it to a heartbeat, steady, comforting, alive. The aroma of fresh coffee filled every corner of the house, mingling with the faint scent of cinnamon she often sprinkled on the filter. The sound of dripping water was almost like a song that welcomed the new day. She set 2 cups on the table, one for herself and one for her husband, Daniel. He would soon come down the creaking stairs, still half asleep, with that lazy smile of his. He would kiss her forehead, thank her softly, and sit down to read the morning news on his phone. It was all so normal, so predictable, and Elena loved it. Predictability made her feel safe. The couple had been married for 8 years, and to the outside world, their bond seemed unbreakable. Daniel was a respected man, always polite, always ready to help a neighbor carry groceries or fix a broken fence. He had that charm people admired, the kind of charm that drew attention without effort. Elena, gentle and humble, felt proud to stand beside him. To her, he was more than a husband. He was her anchor, the man who had promised to protect her from life's storms. And yet storms don't announce themselves. They gather quietly in the distance, invisible to the naked eye, until the first strike of lightning tears the sky open. There were moments, though small and fleeting, when Elena sensed something was off. At night, as she drifted toward sleep, she sometimes noticed Daniel's absence from their bed. He would be downstairs, whispering on the phone, his voice low, cautious. When she asked the next morning, he always said it was work. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? He had never given her a reason to doubt him. Love, after all, is built on trust, or maybe on the illusion of it. The town reinforced her sense of security. Each afternoon, she walked the same path to the small market. The grocer would greet her warmly, handing her fresh apples. The florist often slipped a daisy into her basket, saying she deserved a little extra beauty in her day. People admired her. "You are blessed, Elena," they often told her. "Not everyone finds such happiness." She would smile, grateful, and carry the weight of those words like a secret treasure. Yes, she was blessed. Yes, her life was good. But was it real? If Elena had looked closer, perhaps she would have seen the tiny cracks in her so-called perfect world. The way Daniel sometimes avoided her gaze during dinner, the way his phone lit up late at night, casting shadows across his face. The way he smiled at her, but his eyes, oh, his eyes, carried a distance she could never name. Still, she chose blindness. Not because she was weak, but because she loved. And love makes us blind more than any darkness ever could. One autumn evening, as orange leaves scattered across the front yard, Elena sat on the porch with an old novel in her hands. The air was cool, scented with wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. She should have felt peace, but a strange sensation crawled up her spine, a feeling as if she was being watched. She looked up, scanning the empty street. The world was quiet, painted in the colors of twilight. But her heart thumped harder than usual. When Daniel arrived home late that night, his excuse was the same. Work ran longer than expected. She believed him, though a small voice inside whispered otherwise. That voice was faint, almost drowned by her loyalty, but it existed. Illusions are powerful things. They keep us warm in cold nights. They give us hope when reality might destroy us. But illusions, like fragile glass, always carry cracks. And when the first fracture spreads, the entire structure is at risk of shattering. As days turned into weeks, Elena continued her routine. Coffee in the morning, walks to the market, dinner with Daniel at the table, laughter with friends on weekends. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. The kind of perfection that feels rehearsed, but one cannot rehearse forever. Life, in its cruel wisdom, had already begun writing a different story for Elena. Behind her smiles, behind her trust, behind her illusions, something dark was growing. She didn't know it yet, but her life was no longer hers alone. Hidden truths were waiting, truths that would break her heart, truths that would test her strength, and truths that would remind her of a universal law: karma never sleeps. That night, as Elena closed her eyes, she dreamt of walking through a field of roses. But in her dream, every rose had thorns sharper than knives, and as she reached out to touch them, her hands began to bleed. She woke up trembling, unsure why tears had slipped down her cheeks. Daniel lay beside her, turned away, his breathing steady, almost too steady, like someone pretending to sleep. Elena brushed it off, convincing herself it was only a dream, only a meaningless fragment of her imagination. She pulled the blanket over her shoulder, closed her eyes, and forced herself back to sleep. She didn't know that the dream was not meaningless at all. It was a whisper of truth, a shadow of what was coming, a warning from the deepest corners of her soul. Because soon, very soon, the roses of her perfect garden would show their thorns. And when they did, Elena's quiet life, so full of illusions, would collapse under the weight of betrayal. For weeks, Elena convinced herself that her world was whole, that the doubts she sometimes felt were nothing more than fleeting shadows of insecurity. She was, after all, a woman who believed in loyalty, in vows, in the sacred bond of marriage. And Daniel, with his polished manners and his carefully practiced smile, made it so easy for her to believe. He laughed at her jokes, kissed her cheek when he came home, and held her hand during Sunday walks through the park. To everyone around them, they were the perfect couple. But perfection, Elena was beginning to realize, is often the most dangerous mask of all. It started subtly, so subtly that she nearly dismissed it. A late-night message Daniel received, the phone vibrating on the nightstand while he was in the shower. She glanced at the screen, and though she couldn't see the full message, she caught the heart emoji glowing in the dim light. It struck her, not like a scream but like a whisper, soft, quiet, but deeply unsettling. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, Elena asked casually, "Who was that?" "Just work," he replied without hesitation, too quickly, almost rehearsed. "They keep me busy even at night." She nodded, forcing a smile, though something in her heart had shifted. The cracks widened as days went by. Daniel's absences grew longer. He left earlier in the mornings, came home later at night, sometimes carrying the faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers. When Elena leaned in to kiss him, he would turn his face slightly, offering his cheek instead of his lips. Small gestures, invisible to others, but sharp enough to cut her trust little by little. Still, Elena held on. She told herself she was imagining things, that suspicion was poison, and love was stronger. But the truth has a way of clawing itself into the light, no matter how hard we try to bury it. One evening, as she folded laundry in the bedroom, Daniel's phone buzzed again. He was in the shower, and for the first time in years, Elena's trembling hands picked it up. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She didn't want to snoop, she told herself. She only wanted to ease her fears. The message was short, innocent to an outsider, but devastating to her. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was unforgettable." Elena's breath caught. Her hands went cold, the phone slipping slightly between her fingers. The letters blurred as tears filled her eyes. "Tomorrow? Last night?" The words repeated in her mind like echoes in an empty chamber. When Daniel stepped out moments later, whistling as if nothing in the world was wrong, she dropped the phone back on the bed and quickly turned away, pretending to organize the clothes. Her chest burned, but she said nothing. That night, she lay beside him in silence, staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully, or pretended to. She could smell the faint trace of a perfume she had never owned. Her mind screamed questions, but her lips refused to give them voice. The next day, Elena tried to carry on as usual. She walked to the market, greeted the familiar vendors, and smiled when the florist handed her a daisy. But inside, her world had already shifted. She looked at the flower in her hand and wondered how many times she had smiled in ignorance, how many times she had mistaken lies for love. On her way home, she noticed things she had never truly paid attention to before. The way people looked at her with admiration, believing her life was perfect. The way Daniel's colleagues complimented their marriage at gatherings, unaware of the cracks beneath the surface. She realized then that appearances are nothing but fragile glass, waiting for the smallest stone to shatter them. That evening she confronted him, not with anger, but with fear. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice trembling, "are you hiding something from me?" He looked at her, eyes steady, face unreadable. "Of course not. Why would you even think that?" "Because you're different," she whispered. "You're not the man you used to be with me." For a moment, his gaze faltered. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Elena saw the truth in his hesitation, the truth behind his carefully constructed smile. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're imagining things, Elena. I love you. I always have." The words sounded sweet, but they felt empty, like a song sung without meaning. And deep down, Elena knew. In the days that followed, she became more observant. She noticed how he guarded his phone like a treasure, never leaving it unattended. She noticed how his late nights at work grew more frequent, how his shirt sometimes carried faint stains of lipstick hidden beneath the collar. Her heart broke with every discovery, but she remained silent. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was hope that he would return to her fully if she gave him enough time. Perhaps it was love. The kind of love that clings to hope even when it is dying. One night, while sitting alone in the living room, Elena whispered to herself, "I don't know if I'm strong enough to face this truth." Tears slid down her cheeks, and she hugged herself as if trying to keep from falling apart. But strength is often born in the darkest moments. And though Elena didn't realize it yet, every lie, every late-night message, every empty smile was preparing her for the storm that was about to break. Because betrayal, once discovered, cannot be ignored. It festers, it grows, and eventually, it demands justice. And justice, whether through fate, karma, or the simple unraveling of lies, was coming. That night, as she lay awake once again beside Daniel, Elena's heart carried a new weight. She could no longer pretend she didn't. No, she could no longer convince herself that everything was fine. The hidden truth was out, even if unspoken. The smiles they shared in public were nothing but masks. And masks, no matter how beautiful, always fall apart. What Elena didn't yet realize was that the fall of that mask would not only reveal Daniel's betrayal, it would change her life forever. The morning the truth broke her life open began like any other. The kettle's soft hiss, the scrape of a chair across the kitchen floor, the gentle thud of a mug on wood. Elena moved through the ritual with the quiet precision of someone who has repeated the same steps for years, as if rhythm could protect her from chaos. Outside, the town was still. Mist lay low over the street, and the roses she tended glistened with dew. It should have been an ordinary morning. It wasn't. Daniel's phone, face down beside his plate, buzzed once. The sound was small, almost polite, but it pierced through the room with a finality that made Elena's hand pause in midair. He didn't look down. He didn't need to. He knew. She watched him inhale, hold the breath, release it too slowly. A microsecond of tension. "A tremor in the mask. You're leaving early?" she asked, trying to make the question sound like a casual observation. "Deadlines," he said. The word was soft, harmless. He kissed her temple, the way a man might bless a picture hanging on a wall. Affection without intimacy. Ritual without warmth. Don't wait up. Her smile was a thin fabric stretched over splintered wood. I won't. He left. The door closed. Silence flooded the kitchen, thick and heavy. Elena stood there for a long time, her fingers pressed flat against the table, as if the grain could steady her. Then she moved with sudden purpose. She wasn't going to break into his phone. She had promised herself lines she wouldn't cross, rules that kept her dignity intact. But lines are easy to draw when you haven't been pushed to the edge. This time, she didn't need to cross them. The message came to her. It was tucked into her email, an account she barely used, sent from an address that looked like a random spill of letters. No greeting, no explanation, just a time, a place, and a photograph. The photo was grainy, captured in the amber light of a restaurant she knew well, the one with the curved windows facing the river and a pianist who played old love songs on Tuesdays. In the picture, Daniel sat in a corner booth, leaning forward, eyes soft, smile unfinished, and that way a smile is when it's not for the camera, but for the person across from you. Elena recognized the person across from him not by her face, tilted down, hair falling like a curtain, but by the daisy lying between their glasses of wine. A single daisy, white and bright, the same kind the florist slipped into Elena's basket each week for a little extra joy. The woman's hand was on the table, fingers brushing that daisy's stem. Elena stared at the photo until the pixels seemed to pulse. She told herself there were 1,000 explanations. A coworker, a client, a coincidence. But there are objects that refuse to be innocent no matter how you argue with them, and in that moment, the daisy was no longer a flower. It was a signature. She hadn't named the florist in her mind before. The woman had always just been the kind lady from the corner shop, the one who tied bouquets with quiet grace and a smile that never showed teeth. But now the smile had a name. She remembered someone calling out, "Clara, can you wrap this for me?" one afternoon, and a presence that threaded itself through Elena's memories in a way that felt suddenly, unbearably intimate. Clara had looked into Elena's eyes, had handed her flowers for her table, had asked softly, "Any special plans this weekend?" And Elena, with a soft, grateful laugh, had told her, "Just dinner with my husband." Elena closed the email and stood very still. The kettle, forgotten, had cooled. The coffee tasted like ash. She rinsed her cup, hands steady, and then she did something that surprised even her. She didn't call anyone. She didn't cry. She put on her coat, slipped her phone into her pocket, and walked into the mist. The restaurant by the river was not far. Elena moved through the lanes like a ghost, recognizable to those who knew her, yet untouchable. She felt the world around her dim, as if her senses were pulling away from everything but the task ahead. Her heart did not race. It marched. Her breath did not shake. It measured. At the river's bend, the restaurant's curved windows caught the pale light, smearing it like oil across glass. Inside, tables were being laid for lunch. The pianist tested a few notes and then stopped. She could have left then, told herself that this was madness, that she didn't want proof. But love, once wounded, cannot heal on fantasy. It needs truth, like a broken bone needs setting, no matter the pain. She approached the host, a young man with kind eyes. "I'm meeting someone," she said. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. She was meeting a version of her husband she had never met before. "Name?" he asked. She looked past him, through the forest of chairs and half-polished glasses, toward the back corner where the light softened, the corner from the photo. "I'll find them," she said gently. The host hesitated, then nodded. Elena moved toward the corner with the quiet courage of someone walking into fire because there is nowhere else to go. She could feel her pulse in her palms. Everything in her vision sharpened, the glint of water beyond the window, a napkin, folded like a white sail, the slight wobble of a table leg near her knee. The closer she got, the louder the world became. Forks chiming, a laugh from the bar, the soft chord of the piano settling on a note that felt like a held breath. And then she saw them. Daniel, in a jacket she had bought him last winter, his hair brushed back the way he did when he wanted to look particularly composed. Across from him, Clara. Her hair was not a curtain now. It was tucked behind one ear, revealing a face Elena had seen 100 times in the warm bloom of shop lights. There was a daisy on the table between them. Clara's hand rested near it. Daniel's fingers traced the rim of his glass, a small circle, again and again, as if soothing a restless thought. Elena didn't make a scene. She did not shout. She stood where she was, unable to move closer, unwilling to leave. The world narrowed to a tunnel framing the two of them. A sentence formed in her mind. He looks at her the way he used to look at me, and once formed, it would not disappear. Clara laughed at something. Daniel leaned in, his smile unfinished and real. The laugh carved a trench through Elena's chest, and left silence. She realized with a sudden and terrible clarity that there are two kinds of heartbreak. The kind that arrives with a bang and knocks you off your feet, and the kind that slides in on quiet shoes and sits down beside you with your permission because you kept telling yourself it was nothing. Elena stepped back. The floor under her shoes felt like thin ice. She walked out before either of them looked up. The mist outside was thicker now, wind pushing it along the river like smoke. She stood at the railing and pressed her palms against the cold metal. The water moved on, indifferent. She didn't remember walking home. She remembered the sensation of moving through rooms that suddenly didn't belong to her, of touching objects that belonged to ghosts. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited, for her body to recalibrate, to tell her how to feel. A sound slipped out of her, a fragile thing, half laugh, half sob. She covered her mouth. She didn't want to scare the silence. The phone rang. She stared at it until the screen dimmed, then lit again. A message arrived. Running late. Don't. Wait up. Love you. Her chest tightened, then released. She typed nothing. She set the phone down. She stood, walked to the bathroom, and splashed her face with water that smelled faintly of metal. In the mirror, she looked like herself. It seemed impossible. Betrayal is rarely a single moment. It is a chorus of small moments that finally sing loud enough to be heard. That evening, Elena heard them all. She remembered the nights Daniel had come home with stories that didn't match the time on the clock. She remembered the scent of unfamiliar perfume, the lipstick stain hidden like a mistake under a collar, the hush of his voice in the hallway at 1 a.m. She remembered the daisy in a glass vase on their table, and how Daniel had said, "Nice. Touch," without asking where it came from, as if the flower's presence were an old friend rather than a visitor. She remembered Clara's eyes when they had met outside the shop by accident on a Sunday, how she had glanced almost reflexively at the street behind Elena, as if checking whether someone else might appear. By the time Daniel came home, Elena had passed through shock and was standing, trembling, in something like clarity. She didn't have a script. She didn't have a plan. She had truth. It was enough. He walked in with the smell of rain on his coat. "Hey," he said, casual, easing, his keys into the bowl. "You okay? You look pale." "I saw you," she said, and the 3 words carried everything: the photograph, the daisy, the river, the pianist's suspended cord. At the river. With her. The room inhaled. Daniel froze, then turned slowly. In that slow turn lived 1,000 possible futures: denial like a shield, anger like a blade, confession like a broken cup. His face settled into something careful. With who? He asked, buying time, the oldest currency in the world. She swallowed. The florist. He blinked, and then something in him, something small, perhaps decency, perhaps exhaustion, gave up pretending. He didn't say, "Which florist?" He didn't say, "You're imagining things." He exhaled, sat down, and rubbed his forehead with his thumb and forefinger like the admission itself was a headache. The mask fell without drama. It didn't shatter. It simply slid away. "How long?" Elena asked, though part of her didn't want the answer. The question was a ritual. The answer would be a stone. "A few months," he said. Then, as if that mattered, like a man holding up a broken glass and saying, "But it's only a small crack." He added, "It wasn't supposed to be anything." Elena laughed once, a sound that cut her throat on its way out. "And what is it now?" He didn't answer. She looked at him and for the first time saw the architecture of his cowardice. It wasn't monstrous. It wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. That was the worst part. He had let something grow because cutting it would have required honesty, and honesty would have required courage, and courage would have cost him comfort. So he had chosen comfort, day after day, and called it complicated. "Do you love her?" The words felt like stones in her mouth. He stared at the floor. "I don't know," he said, which meant yes, or close enough to yes to make no indecent. Elena nodded slowly, tasting metal. In the years they had built together, she had believed love was a shelter. It turned out love was also a compass. When the needle spun, you could pretend it was just settling or you could admit you were lost. She folded her hands to keep them from shaking. "When were you going to tell me? I didn't want to hurt you." The sentence was a reflex, a bandage applied to a wound he didn't want to see. "You did," she said softly. "You already did." She thought of the daisy on that table, of Clara's hand, of her own kitchen where she had stood holding a mug while his phone buzzed beside it. "And you let me water the illusion like a houseplant." Silence stretched, thin and tight. "I'm sorry," he said, and for a moment she wanted to believe he was, that his sorry was a door opening to a room where everything could be rearranged into a new shape that didn't hurt. But sorry is only a key if it unlocks change. Otherwise, it's a word you hand to the person you've injured and ask them to be grateful for. She stood. "Pack a bag." He looked up, surprised. "Now?" "Now," she said. "For tonight." He started to argue, then read the room, the steadiness in her voice, the calm in her posture, and he went silent. He walked upstairs. She listened to the sounds, the closet door, the zipper, the footsteps. He came down with a small duffel. They looked at each other like strangers who had once been intimate and were now trying to remember the common language. The door, he paused. "Elena, you can pick up the rest tomorrow," she said. "I'll leave it by the door." He nodded. "I never meant—" She raised a hand, not as a warning, but as a farewell to a version of her life that had already left. "Go." He went. She locked the door and leaned her forehead against it, but only for a second. Then she turned and walked through the house the way a curator might walk through a museum after hours, seeing everything differently. The couch where they had watched films, the framed photo by the stairs, the folded throw blanket on the chair. She lifted the blanket and held it to her chest. It smelled like fabric and dust, and something else she couldn't name. She set it down carefully, like placing a memory back on a shelf. Night brings truth closer because there's less to distract you from it. Elena didn't try to outrun it. She lit a lamp and sat at the table with a notebook she hadn't opened in years. She wrote, not to bleed onto the page, but to organize the chaos into sentences that could be contained, if not solved. She wrote the facts. She wrote the feelings. She wrote the questions that had no answers. Was there a moment I could have changed this? Did I help build the lie by choosing not to see? What part of me believed I didn't deserve to know? At some point, her hand slowed. She looked up, and her eyes landed on the vase. A single daisy stood inside, its white petals still crisp. She remembered the way Clara had tucked one into her basket like a secret handshake. She had thought it a kindness. Now the gesture read like handwriting in a letter never meant for her. Elena stood, walked to the sink, and emptied the vase. She didn't crush the flower. She placed it gently in the trash. Then she washed the vase with slow, deliberate motions, like she was rinsing the residue of a story she had never agreed to live in. When the glass went clear, she set it upside down to dry. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one shorter. I'm sorry for tonight. We should talk. The sender was a number she didn't recognize until she did. Clara. Elena's thumb hovered over the screen. She thought of the river's fog, the piano's note, the daisy between glasses. She thought of how betrayal always wants to explain itself, to frame its motives as accidents, to call its choices unfortunate. She deleted the message, not because conversation was impossible, but because the timing belonged to Elena now. She would decide where and when and if the story would be told in her presence again. She turned off the phone and went to bed. Sleep did not come quickly, but it did come in fragments, like a window slowly darkening. In her dreams, there were no roses or daisies. There was a road, straight and long, with no one walking ahead of her, no one behind her. She walked until the horizon shifted from night to morning. Morning carried the ordinary on its back, the mail, the kettle, a neighbor's, dog barking at a squirrel, and yet everything had changed. Elena's chest was sore, as if she had cried for hours, even though the tears had only come in stuttered intervals. She moved through the rooms, opening windows, letting air into corners where quiet had thickened. A knock sounded at the door. Then, another, softer, not Daniel's. She knew this immediately, the way your body knows the difference between thunder and a door slamming. When she opened it, Clara stood on the step with a cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders and a look on, her face that begged for gentleness. Elena admired the audacity, admired in a cold way how some people can injure you and then arrive at your threshold expecting to be the ones consoled. "I shouldn't have come," Clara started, which is what people say when they have carefully decided to come anyway. There are things you should know." Elena stepped outside and closed the door behind her, as if protecting her home from unnecessary air. The morning was bright. The roses in the garden were open-mouthed, as if listening. "Then say them," Elena said, her voice steady. Clara swallowed. "It wasn't planned. I never meant—" "I know," Elena said. "It's never planned, but it is chosen, again and again." Silence. A car passed at the end of the street. Somewhere a child laughed. The world performed its daily play, indifferent to private tragedies. "I ended it," Clara said. "Before yesterday, weeks ago. I told him it had to stop. He said he couldn't let go yet." Her eyes shone, not with triumph, not with shame, but with a complicated grief that Elena recognized from her own mirror. "I thought you should hear that." Elena weighed the sentence like a coin on her palm. It didn't buy anything she wanted. "Thank you for telling me," she said, because it cost her nothing to be polite. Clara nodded, then, after a breath, unfolded the thing. She had come to leave. "He told me you were strong," she said, a tiny bitter smile at the corner of her lips, like she had been promised a woman made of steel and had found one made of flesh who refused to break. "He said you'd be okay." Elena felt a flicker of something like humor at the absurdity. "He was right," she said, and heard the truth in it even as her heart ached. But okay and unchanged are not the same. Clara nodded again, understanding that the conversation was over. She glanced at the roses. "They're beautiful," she said, because small talk is a refuge when the deeper water is too cold. "They are," Elena replied. She did not add that beauty had never protected her from anything. Clara left. Elena watched her walk down the path and turn the corner. The morning swallowed her. The hours that followed did not fix anything. They did not pretend to. Elena gathered Daniel's remaining things into boxes, folding, stacking, labeling with a neatness born of muscle memory and a desire to avoid chaos. Each object had weight and meaning. Each object also had a simple description that made it easier to carry. Shirts, books, chargers, fragments of a life that had to be moved somewhere else. She tied the boxes with twine and set them by the door. When she looked up, her eyes landed on the mirror at the end of the hall. For a long time, she had practiced seeing herself as a background to someone else's foreground. Now the frame held only her. She wasn't sure who she would become next, but she recognized the seriousness in her own gaze and found it steadier than yesterday. On the table, her notebook lay open to a page where she had written a single line and underlined it twice. What you do in the dark always finds the light. The sentence wasn't a threat. It was gravity. The doorbell rang again. This time, Daniel. He didn't try the handle. He waited. She opened the door and stepped aside without inviting him in. He understood. He saw the boxes. He nodded. "Thank you," he said. Elena didn't answer. He lifted the top box and then another, carrying them to his car. He looked smaller than he had 2 days ago. Not physically, but in a way that comes from a person realizing that the world does not bend for the comfort of their lies. When he returned for the last box, he paused. "I'm going to call a lawyer," he said, almost apologetically, as if legal clarity were a rudeness rather than an adult necessity. "So will I," Elena said, and the calm in her voice surprised them both. He searched her face for anger he could argue with or for softness he could lean on. He found neither. "I'm sorry," he said again, quieter this time, a word smaller than the space it needed to fill. "I know," she replied. "Be better than sorry." He nodded, a man receiving instructions he didn't yet know how to follow, and left. Elena closed the door and leaned against it, not with the weight of despair, but with the weightlessness that follows a decision finally made. She exhaled. Something in the room shifted, imperceptible but real, like a house relaxing after a storm. Betrayal shattered her life. Yes. But the shattering also did something else. It removed the glass that had kept her from feeling the wind. The air moved through the rooms now. Some moments hurt. Some felt like relief. Most felt like truth. Sturdy, unadorned, survivable. As afternoon tilted toward evening, Elena walked to the garden and clipped the roses that had opened that morning. She brought them inside and set them carefully into the clean vase. No daisies? Not today. The roses were enough. She sat at the table and watched the light shift across the petals. She did not pray for revenge. She did not write a speech. She did not rehearse imagined confrontations. She let the silence carry her forward, inch by inch, toward a life where she would learn how to rebuild without borrowing someone else's promise. What neither Daniel nor Clara understood, and what Elena could not yet know, was that choices have echoes. The paths you walk circle back with their own feet. The world is not a courtroom. It does not mete out justice on a schedule, but it remembers. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it aligns its quiet forces not to punish but to reveal. The eye. Betrayal had shattered everything. The pieces on the floor looked like ruin. But under certain light, even shards can gleam. Outside, the river moved on. In the distance, someone played a piano. This time, the melody didn't hang on a single, suspended note. It progressed. It promised an answer, not in words, but in motion. Tomorrow, consequences would begin to arrive of their own accord, like letters posted long ago finally reaching the right address. And when they did, Elena would be there, standing, watching, not with bitterness, but with the steadiness of someone who has learned that karma doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it turns the handle and lets itself in. Karma never arrives with a warning. It does not knock on the door politely. It slips in quietly, weaving itself through the choices people make, until the weight of those choices becomes impossible to ignore. For weeks after Daniel left, Elena remained silent. She did not call him, did not chase him, did not beg for explanations that would only wound her further. She carried herself with dignity, and while her heart ached, her silence spoke louder than any words could. Daniel, however, discovered quickly that silence is not absence. It is consequence. At first, he tried to keep both lives alive. He went to Clara with promises, telling her that Elena was strong, that she would eventually forgive him, that they could build something new together without fear. But Clara, who had once believed in his charm, began to see the cracks Elena had already learned to recognize. He was distracted, restless, unable to give himself fully. The same lies he had once told Elena began to echo in Clara's ears. One evening, When Daniel reached for her hand across the table, Clara pulled back. "You're not free," she whispered. "Not from her, not from yourself." The look in her eyes was not one of love, but of realization. She saw him for what he truly was, a man who built bridges only to stand trembling in the middle, never crossing, never committing. By the end of that week, Clara walked away, and Daniel, who thought he could have everything, found himself with nothing. It didn't stop there. Karma works not just in love but in reputation, in the way truth seeps out like water through cracks, in stone. Word began to spread in whispers, first among colleagues, then among neighbors. People noticed his absence from the home he once shared with Elena. They noticed Clara avoiding the market where she had once worked with pride. They noticed Elena walking alone yet carrying herself with a quiet strength that made people wonder. More Daniel tried to hide, the more visible he became. Invitations to gatherings grew fewer. Colleagues stopped seeking his advice. Even in his workplace, trust thinned. Someone who betrays at home, they reasoned, may betray elsewhere. The foundation he had built for years began to crumble under the weight of his own actions. Meanwhile, Elena did not need to lift a finger. She did not seek revenge, nor did she speak ill of him. Her silence, her composure, her refusal to play, the part of the bitter victim became its own kind of justice. People respected her more, admired her resilience, and in that admiration, Daniel's image shrank. But karma was not only for him. Clara, too, felt its reach. Customers at the flower shop began to whisper. Some stopped buying altogether, ashamed to be associated with her. What had once been a place of beauty and warmth now felt heavy with judgment. She tried to defend herself, telling friends it was complicated, that she had not meant to hurt anyone. But intentions do not erase actions. Every daisy she tied, every bouquet she wrapped, reminded her of what she had broken. And so, while Daniel struggled with a shrinking world, Clara carried the weight of quiet shame. Neither of them found peace in each other. The very bond that had destroyed Elena's trust became their prison. Elena, on the other hand, slowly began to heal. She noticed small changes in herself. The mornings were quieter, but they were hers alone now. She brewed coffee for one, and though the silence ached at first, it soon became a comfort. She planted new flowers in her garden. Sunflowers this time, tall and bold, turning their faces toward the light. Neighbors began to stop by, not out of pity but out of respect, drawn to her calm presence. She still carried pain, but pain no longer defined her. It shaped her, sharpened her, made her more aware of the kind of strength she had always possessed. And with every step forward, she realized something Daniel and Clara never would. You cannot escape the truth. You can only delay it. Karma was not cruel. It was not loud. It was simply just. It balanced the scales in silence, giving back to each what they had sown. And as Elena watched this unfold, she understood that she did not need revenge. Life was already doing the work for her. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. What once felt unbearable slowly transforms into memory, and memory, though painful, loses its power to wound. Weeks turned into months, and Elena began to notice how the shadows in her life grew shorter. Each day, replaced by light, she thought she had lost forever. She rebuilt herself not through grand gestures, but through quiet decisions. Each morning, she opened the windows wide, letting the air sweep through the rooms that had once felt suffocating. She rearranged the furniture, painted the walls, planted herbs on the kitchen windowsill. These were small acts, but each one whispered the same truth. This is my space now, my life, my future. The garden became her sanctuary. Roses still bloomed, but the sunflowers rose higher, bold and radiant, their faces following the light. Neighbors often paused at the gate to admire them, and Elena found herself smiling genuinely when they complimented her work. The smile was not the mask she once wore beside Daniel. It was real, born from a heart that had learned it could survive even the deepest cracks. She began to write again. The notebook that once carried her grief now carried her reflections, her dreams, her visions of what life could be. The words flowed differently now, less about loss, more about resilience. In those pages, she discovered her own voice, one that had been quiet for too long, silenced by the weight of illusions. Daniel, meanwhile, drifted further away. He tried to return once or twice, sending messages late at night, knocking on the door with promises of change. But Elena no longer trembled at the sound of his voice. She no longer confused pity with love. She had seen what he was capable of, and she understood that forgiveness did not mean forgetting. She chose distance. She chose peace. Clara, too, faded into the background of Elena's life. The flower shop eventually closed, its windows dark and empty. The daisies disappeared from the street corner, leaving behind only the memory of what they once symbolized. Elena did not hate her. She did not wish her harm. But she knew one thing with certainty: some people are lessons, not companions. Elena's strength was no longer about surviving betrayal. It was about embracing freedom. She began to travel to nearby towns, exploring markets and parks she had never seen before. She discovered a love for painting, capturing the landscapes that reminded her of how far she had come. She laughed more easily, her voice lighter, no longer weighed down by fear or doubt. One evening, as the sun set over her garden, Elena stood among the sunflowers and realized she was not the same woman who once cried into her pillow while Daniel slept beside her. She was stronger, wiser, and above all, free. The betrayal had been a storm, fierce and devastating, but storms always pass. And when they do, the air is clearer, the ground richer, the heart more prepared to bloom again. Elena was no longer a victim. She was no longer trapped in illusions. She was a survivor, a fighter, and a woman who had learned that karma may break you, but it also rebuilds you into something stronger than you ever imagined. Have you ever faced a truth that broke your heart but made you stronger? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and follow for more powerful stories of karma, resilience, and hope.